Well, this is fun. The last time I presented, I was young and energetic, and they had a podium that I stood behind. And now that I'm reaching 60, I think they decided that I needed a chair. Thanks, Marilyn, for taking care of me. This is fun. In my heart of hearts, I'm still a prosecutor. I spent 17 years prosecuting criminal cases. When I graduated from law school, I worked in a small law firm in Logan, where 50% of my work was as a contract prosecutor for Logan City and then a couple other little cities, smaller cities. And then after 4 years of doing that, I ran for county attorney, served 2 terms. And following that, went back to private practice and had about 6 or 7 city clients. And I was in the justice court every night, or every week at least. So 17 years as a prosecutor and 13 years as a college or university president. And I can tell you that I'm a lawyer every day of my life. In fact, before I get started on this, I'm going to throw out a little implicit bias analogy for me. This might sound slightly self-serving, but you can all consider it self-serving for you as well. Part of the bias that we have, and I'll come back to this, but part of our bias is rooted in the desire to be surrounded by people like us. We kind of are comfortable that way. That's just part of the comfortness of being a person. We have comfort foods, and we have places that we're familiar with and that we go back to time and time again, and we have people that we're comfortable around, and it's just part of our nature. Well, you can imagine that if I'm a criminal prosecutor and lawyer practicing, when I apply to be a college president, what the faculty's reaction might be. They think that JD stands for junior doctor, not Juris Doctor. And they really want someone like them. And so their natural tendency is to always try to promote somebody that looks like them. So Snow College, I was asked to apply to Snow College and had been serving on their board of trustees for about 12 years. And then when I applied, they had me go through a whole series of interviews. I think I had 7 interviews with that one job. The same number when I went to Southern Utah University. But 7 interviews. One was with faculty, and one was with students, and one was with community, and one administrators, and so forth. The faculty ranked me last among all the candidates. Other groups ranked me first or wherever it was, and in the end I got the job. But the faculty ranked the person highest that looked the most like them, irrespective of particular skills for the job. I love working with the faculty. My dad was a faculty member, spent his whole life as a faculty member. I have a brother that's a faculty member, and they do a great job. But when I'm president of a university, how much I know about American history informs a piece of my job, but not nearly as much as the experience that I had as a county attorney and as a lawyer. Every single day I have some HR issue. It seems like every day, but it's not. Every 6 months, somebody threatens to sue me. And I say, go ahead, make my day. I've been there. In fact, I'd rather talk to your lawyer than you. I'm comfortable with your lawyer. But we tend to just simply be comfortable with who we're like, irrespective of what is the most qualifying features for the job. And my job is mostly government relations, law, HR, vision, fundraising, all of these things that are, actually law is a great preparation. and running for office as county attorney, working with county commissions, working with city councils and mayors, helping them with their political challenges was fabulous preparation for me for the job that I've got now. And again, I'll come back to this in a few minutes, but lawyers are educators. That's what we do as lawyers, is teach. Whether we're educating judges or educating juries, educating our city councils or county councils or commissions or the community, the mere fact that we file charges is an effort to communicate and educate the community about what's acceptable and not, and what the consequences are. So you are, in fact, educators, and I spent my whole career as an educator, mostly, sort of. Marilyn, thanks for that introduction. It's nice to be here with you. As I said, my identity at its core is as a lawyer, and it will always be that way. Marilyn did make a mistake in the introduction, most of them. She tried her best, you know. But I don't have 4 children. I have 4 adults. When people say, how many kids have you got? None. I have 3 women and 1 man. They're all grown and gone, and they've got kids, and they're married. But I remember attending this conference as a city and then county prosecutor years and years ago, and this is bringing back wonderful memories. Well, okay, let's see if we can make this work. How much information can we process in a single second? This is one of those questions that provides a little bit of a foundation for everything that we're going to talk about. At Southern Utah University, we invited a very talented presenter. Her name is Kimberly Papillon, and she's done over 200 training sessions for federal judges and California judges. I think she's based in California. But she came to our campus and gave some presentations, and she asked this question that I'm going to pose to you, and it follows this comment, and that is that scientists think that the conscious portion of our brain can process about 40 frames of information per second. But they think that our subconscious portion of our brain can process up to 1.2 million frames per second. I can't even comprehend those numbers. The gap, or the difference between the two, whether it's 1.2 million or 600,000 or whatever the number might be, the point is that the gap, and we all know this from our own experiences, the gap between our conscious ability to process information and unconscious is massive. And if the unconscious portion of our brain can process 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more information in the same amount of time, then we would ask ourselves this question: who's in charge? Who's making the decisions? Where are these decisions coming from? Are they decisions that we're making, or are they decisions that are somehow tucked away in the recesses of our minds that we're totally unaware of? Just one of those interesting things to think about. And how is it that we can shape this unconscious portion? And it begins with a recognition that we have this unconscious portion of our brain, that it's processing more rapidly than our conscious, and a recognition that there are things tucked in there that come from our culture, our background, things that we maybe have forgotten but are still there. If I go to my hometown and I'm not paying close attention, driving around, I will find myself driving to the home that I don't live in anymore. It's just the unconscious portion of my brain is reaching back 20 or 30 years and taking me where it used to take me hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And even today when that happens, I just think, oh my gosh, that is so hilarious. What am I doing? I'm going home, but I don't live there. Haven't lived there for a long time. Well, and then once we recognize all this, then we have to put together some kind of a strategy to take control. And before we get done with this, we're gonna look at this from a university president's perspective, and we're gonna look at this from a prosecutor's perspective, is how we approach all these things. So that's the introduction. All right, you have probably all seen this, but I'm putting this up for illustrative purposes, and maybe one of you have not seen this riddle, but I'm guessing you all have. Here is the surgeon's dilemma. A father and his son are in a car accident. The father dies at the scene, and the son, badly injured, is rushed to the hospital. In the operating room, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy, he is my son." How can this be? I'm going to pause, thinking that maybe one or two of the 100 or 200 of you out there haven't seen this riddle before. What's the answer to this riddle?
The mother's the surgeon. The boy's mother's the surgeon.
Now, I've got to flip back and forth so I can get my podcast thing working. Let's see if I can make this work. So someone yelled out, "The boy's mother is the surgeon." We've got, make sure that I've got my notes where they be. Mirazan Bengadi is a researcher at Harvard and a co-author of the book Blind Spot, co-author with Anthony Greenwald. And she uses this riddle to illustrate the story when she's talking about our blind spots. And what's fun about her is that she tells the story that she heard this riddle in 1985 and couldn't come up with the right answer. Even with her background, the training, everything that was going on in her life, she couldn't come up with the right answer. Well, let's see if this podcast, so she's got a wonderful podcast, and let's see if this will play.
Recently, I was lecturing about these topics to a large group of people, and I saw that when I asked the audience, what's the right answer here? And a bunch of people said, the surgeon is the boy's mother. I noticed that a woman sitting at one of the tables up front near me just hit her head on the table. Hard enough that I think I heard a sound. So later, when she came up to talk to me about this with a blue bruise on her head, I said to her, "You shouldn't have hit your head so hard on the table when you heard the right answer." And she said to me, "Of course I should have. My mother is a surgeon." Think about this. A person whose mother is a surgeon couldn't get the right answer here. How can this be? So it's not the how can this be of the riddle. It's how can it be that we can't get to the right answer?
Imagine being a woman listening to the riddle, having a mother who is a surgeon, and not being able to answer the riddle. We actually find ourselves creating patterns that form the way we see the world. I'm going to ask you a question. So I've got a small audience here of about 6 or 7 people. But think about it yourselves, wherever you might be. I'm going to list a series of numbers, and I want you to tell me what number you would place after my series of numbers. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Now, why did you say 32?
It seems like we're doubling the numbers.
It seemed as if I was doubling the numbers. 2, 4, 8, 16, and you say 32. But I didn't ask you to tell me anything about what would be the next in the series. But because I went 2, 4, 8, 16, you assumed you saw a pattern, right? You could see a pattern developing, and the next one in the pattern would naturally be 32. But I didn't ask you to tell me the answer to the pattern. I just asked you for a number. The point is that as humans, we look for patterns. It is our natural state. And the fact that we sometimes at school or amongst friends are asked patterns, it kind of keeps us in that mode of thinking. But so I could say, for example, hypothetically, that when I'm 5, a male surgeon removes my tonsils. And when I'm 8, a male surgeon fixes a broken bone. And when I'm 15, a male surgeon tapes up, fixes my whatever else breaks. And then when my wife and I go to the hospital and she has a surgeon and it's male, I see these patterns. And these patterns make my thinking more efficient. They speed up thinking and everything else, so that by the time I'm 40 or 50 or 60, if someone was to say to me, who would you like as your surgeon? And they list 3 or 4 names, I'm more likely to choose the male surgeon, the female surgeon, because that fits the pattern. And I'm not being biased against anybody. I'm just using my brain in its most efficient way possible. We have this wonderful friend. I say wonderful because he's a billionaire. He has other great qualities. Not just that he's a billionaire, but he's been super supportive of Southern Utah University in some areas that are really interesting to him. And in fact, he's donated substantial money to help our Utah Shakespeare Festival. You might not know that the Utah Shakespeare Festival is a department of the university. And even though my junior high school drama instructor wouldn't let me have a part in the play because I was so bad, I'm now the head of a Tony Award-winning theater. If only she could see me now. Fortunately, my duties don't include acting or selecting actors or anything else. But it's a wonderful opportunity for me. If you were to ask this person, how is it that you became a billionaire? I mean, there's a lot of people investing in the tech world at the same time that you were. Why did you become so wealthy? His answer would be, I looked for patterns. And I found patterns that other people didn't see. And then I applied those patterns to businesses that I chose to invest in, and it worked for me. So these patterns make our lives more simple. They make our brains work more efficiently. We don't waste energy. Sometimes they give us excuses. We oftentimes will say, I can't do that because it will establish a precedence. I want to keep the pattern because it protects me from somebody criticizing a decision that I might make. I'm going to do it this way today and this way tomorrow and this way the next day. It's a comfortable, defensible way for me to approach my life. And it can make us wealthy if we find the right patterns. It also keeps us alive. We see patterns that foretell danger, and it keeps us alive. And we have a lot of years of our evolving brains that have made us very, very good at finding these patterns. Patterns become mental shortcuts. They become rules of thumb or precedents that we stick to. They evolve from patterns to stereotypes. That I meet somebody from a certain culture and I meet somebody else and someone else. It reminds me of a story that I once heard from somebody that was all Japanese are short. At least the one I met was. And then the next one I met was, and the next one. And then when you meet somebody that's tall, it breaks that pattern. So we create these stereotypes. And the stereotypes then become embedded in our unconscious mind. And they form the basis of implicit biases that shape our decision making. And sometimes we're aware of them, and many times we're not at all aware that they're even there. Well, I'm going to jump to a different way of thinking. This pattern, implicit bias, stereotyping is something that happens quickly as our subconscious mind works. Some of you may have seen or read the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. It's a very interesting book, and in that book, Daniel Kahneman talks about two ways that our brains think: this automatic, quick processing portion and a slower processing portion. And if you look at this slide and focus on the two images at the top, what you'll see on the left side is a person. And as you look at that person, I would dare guess that you are very rapidly forming impressions of this person. He's angry, or something has him energized. And then you might look at his t-shirt and his hair and his beard, and you might say he might be an athlete. But you're running through all of these things because there are images in here that match images you've seen in the past. And it helps you form a really quick decision. When I looked at that, I immediately thought, he's an athlete, he's angry, somebody scored, and I drew all these conclusions about him as a person. But then if you go to the left side, when you see 17 times 24, what happens in your thinking? And I suspect if you're like me and like the majority of people, your brain slows down. You don't look at that unless you're a genius. You don't look at that and go quickly with a number. You say, oh, 17 times 24. How am I going to calculate that in my head? 17 times 10 and 17 times 10 and then 4, or however it is that you might do it. But if we slow our thinking down, we can do that multiplication and come up with the right answer. But two different types of thinking are going on here. In the system one, it is a passive experience. I don't have to think hard. It's just natural that I make assumptions. It's based on impressions. These are all first impressions. It's intuitive. It just comes. It's fast. It's effortless. We develop skills in doing this quickly. After seeing 100,000 people that play football, I start to form a stereotype of what they look like. And it's automatic. But if we go to the system 2 brain portion, it takes effort. It's deliberative. We have to reason through it. We have to stop our mind and think carefully and in a controlled, slow manner. One of the things that helps us work through these implicit biases is if we can force ourselves out of the system 1 into the system 2 when we have time for system 2. this is one of the challenges that we're having with law enforcement right now, is that too frequently, when they're out and it's dark and a threat presents itself or something that appears to be a threat, their system one brain kicks in. They make a lot of quick, emotional impressions. It's intuitive, and they react. And they don't have time for anything else. But when they do have time, they can think through things and be a little more careful. I recall when I was the county attorney screening an officer-involved custodial fatality. So this was for the Weber County Attorney's Office, that somebody in custody died, and they asked us to screen the case. And one of the things that was so interesting about this was that in watching the video, because it was all recorded through I think it was a car camera at the time, not a body camera. But as I was told that when the officers involved in putting this person in custody watched the video of what happened, they were over the top shocked by the language that they used. It was so incredibly offensive to them when they were sitting on a cool moment, watching what they did and how they talked. It didn't even register with them the number of times they were saying super offensive, aggressive kinds of words. And for somebody that just watched the video, like a jury or an administrative body, you would look at that and say, wow, these guys were out of control. But for them to watch it, it was, yeah, maybe I was out of control because I wasn't thinking any of that. I was just in a state of very emotional, feeling threatened, high adrenaline, and our brain just doesn't work the same on those times. So one of the advantages that we have, usually, one of the advantages, I keep saying we because I feel like a prosecutor still, especially today. One of the advantages that we have is that we always are able to have just a little bit more time to think through these kinds of things and move to the system 2 brain kind of analysis. Daniel's work on system 1 and system 2 that you can read more about in Thinking Fast and Slow. He's a Princeton faculty member and a Nobel Prize winner. So it's a really interesting book that I'd recommend to you. And by the way, my colleague, Bailey Bowthorpe, who might be listening in, read all these books and helped me put this stuff together for today. So if you're listening, Bailey, thank you very much. Well, it takes us to this question. Who's in charge? Who's making our decisions for us? We all have values, but are our values driving the decisions? I don't know that anybody would like to think that she or he is racist. None of us have that as a value. But sometimes, because of the patterns and because of the implicit biases in the culture, because our subconscious mind is thinking faster than our conscious mind, that there are things in the back of our head that are moving faster than our value decision is moving. And recognizing that helps us address these challenges that we face. Okay. What is an implicit bias? It can be thought of as an automatic response. Like if I say bread, you might say butter. It's an automatic response. If I say 2, 4, 8, 16, you might say 32. And if I say university president, you might say former professor. If you are a professor, we just have these rules or thumbprints that shape everything we do. They've done a lot of tests. If we were in a large group, I would have handed out a deck of cards. If you sort a deck of cards, if you can go home and try this yourselves if you'd like. If you sort hearts and diamonds, if I hand you a deck of cards and tell you, sort the hearts and diamonds together as quickly as you can, and then sort the clubs and spades together as quickly as I can, and then if I asked you to do it differently, not the hearts and spades, but the hearts and clubs and the spades and diamonds, some of them you can do faster than others. And it's because of the color that you might learn that creates these rules that your brain can follow. And you can sort the red ones quicker than the red ones from the black ones quicker than you can do the faces, different colors. Well, okay. Cognitive associations. Bailey showed me this paragraph, the sentence. What was interesting about it is that when she showed me this, I got halfway through the sentence before it dawned on me that it was misspelled. In fact, I was about 5, 6, 7 words in it when I turned to Bailey and said, that's a misspelled word right there. And then I looked and I thought, oh, they're all misspelled. Our brain doesn't read every letter. It's not reading every frame of information that flashes in front of our minds. As long as the first and last letters are in the right place, the middle letters can be jumbled up. And most people can read this without much of a problem at all. We associate words and letters together and still read just as easily, even when misspelled. This is your automatic brain at work. I got through, we associate words and letters before I realized that they were even misspelled. That might be me because I've never been able to spell well. So maybe it was a comfort thing. Hey, someone else has missed a word. That validates me, you know. There's more going on in our brain than what the conscious portion of our brain sees. And this is why it's so hard to read something like Shakespeare. I can't believe how the Shakespeare actors that come down to the Utah Shakespeare Festival can memorize an entire play of that old English language. It is an unbelievably developed skill. Because for the most part, when we're reading a sentence, we're reading words as a collection. Because we've seen these words and we kind of know what word is coming next, just like we've seen these letters and we know how they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to fit together. If I try to memorize a poem that was written today versus try to memorize a poem that was written in the 1500s, it takes 3 times as much work because the words don't follow the patterns from the 1500s that I'm used to. It takes more effort. Well, what is implicit bias? Let's look at this definition from the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. These biases are different from known biases that individuals may choose to conceal for the purposes of social and or political correctness. So we all have biases. With all apologies to the new members of my family who have red hair, when I was in high school, in college, I would have never dated a person who had red hair. I had a bias against red-haired people, and it stemmed from an experience that I had growing up where there were some red-headed kids that lived on my block, and I didn't like their kinky red hair and overly splotchy face, and I didn't want to marry somebody who would have the risk of having a child that looked like that. How's that for being vulnerable? Is that safe to admit? I think we all have these kinds of biases, and it just happened that growing up, every person I knew with red hair had a certain look that I didn't particularly like, and I didn't want to have children like that. As I continued to get older and older and have more experiences, it dawned on me that people without red hair had children that looked like that, right? You don't have to have red hair. And I started meeting more and more people with red hair and discovered that that there were lots and lots and lots of red-headed people that looked really wonderful to me. Male, female, everything. And now I have at least one daughter-in-law, and we're hoping for grandchildren with red hair. And they look awesome. But it took me from having this experience with red-headed people that embedded this pattern in my mind that caused me to assume an outcome that I didn't want. But as I met more and more and more people, I saw the pattern break up. And then it changed the way I felt. And then I saw people with red hair for what they were, rather than for this stereotype outcome that I was concerned about in my dating life. Anyway, that's kind of how these implicit biases work. We see patterns. They form rules of thumb. They become embedded in our minds. And then we unconsciously or consciously, but in an implicit bias situation, it's unconscious, we act on those. And we may not even be aware of what we're doing. I want you to take a test. This should work. So here's how this goes. If you have an iPhone or something like that, get it out. If you don't, here is the website. Copy it into your laptop. Take your camera. You've probably all done this, so forgive me if I'm being over-explanatory, but take your phone, get your camera, put it over the top of this QR code, and it will just automatically bring up the link. Should. Is it working? This is from Harvard. It's an implicit bias test, and they don't want anybody to be injured by taking this test. So there's a disclaimer that you can read if you choose. If you're in this room and it's too far away, and you want to look at this laptop that's on the side, you could, or you can write it in. So after you get through the disclaimer, you can push "I wish to proceed." And I'm going to wait for somebody in this room to see that it works. You got it? Okay. So "I wish to proceed." And once you do that, what you're going to get is a series of tests. And I'm not going to tell you which test to take. I'd like you to pick one that's most interesting to you. You can see at the top is disabled versus abled, presidential popularity, gay, straight, Arab, Muslim, other people, fat, thin, religious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So pick one, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to just work through this test. And then we'll talk about it for just a minute. I've written down 9:28 on my phone is when we're starting. So 8 to 10 minutes. At the beginning of this, it's going to ask you for some demographic information. The reason is they're collecting this information and using it for their research. They're not going to ask you your name or your address. And I'm going to look at this half a dozen people in this room and ask that we're not having a race, but as soon as you're done, raise your hand. That'll give me a judge. Okay, we have a winner. Somebody in the room is done. I'm looking for faces in the room. How many here are done? Looks like pretty much everybody is. It's been about 11 minutes. Since we're spread out all over the state, except for just a small group here, and the group here doesn't have a mic that you can hear, I would just ask the question, was it surprising to you? This test has been given, these tests have been given millions and millions of times. It's one of the most used implicit bias tests that's ever been created. You can look at them from all of these different types of categories. And what you saw is, for example, if the test was based on religion, it might ask you questions about Christians, questions about Muslims, and ask you questions about good things and bad things. And if you have a tendency to favor or be biased towards Christians over Muslims, it's easier and quicker for you to associate words that are good with Christian than words that are bad with Christian, and the opposite with Muslim. And it just helps show how difficult, or how much more difficult it is, or how much more we have to put in our system to thinking. We slow down to process things that are good and bad in our minds versus things that are good and good. So if we can associate, for example, Christian and good things quicker than Muslim and good things, it just gives you a hint of your subconscious mind, which sees Christians as being better, or Christian, the word Christian being better than the word Muslim. And that might translate into the way we think about people when we are screening cases or hiring them into our offices or choosing to associate in other positive ways with them. But this is one of those things that is fun test to do. You can go home in your office and run through a few, and I'll bring this point up a little bit later, but one of the ways to work on these kinds of implicit biases is to make it social. And if you spend some time going back in your offices and running through some of these tests, talk about them as a group, it can be very productive time. This here's an interesting point. Implicit preferences for one group over another is not necessarily a simple in-group preference. Look at these statistics. About 1/3 of black participants show an implicit preference for white people relative to black people. Isn't that interesting? And 75% of men show a male career bias, and 80% of women show the same bias. Isn't that interesting? That of all of the people, the millions of people that take these tests, what the Harvard researchers find is that a higher percentage of women show a male career bias than do men. But obviously it's a very strong bias for both. This point can be brought out, I think, in the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and some experiences that I've had. Those of you that remember your history class, or whenever it was that you may have studied this case, Kenneth and Mamie Clark did a series of studies on how children respond to white dolls and black dolls. And when they did this study, back prior to Brown versus Board of Education being argued, they actually, my understanding is, they couldn't even find black babies, baby dolls. So they had to paint them. It was that difficult. And then they used these dolls and did tests with infants, children, and they found that among small black children, there was a strong preference for the white doll. And what the conclusion was is that the segregation, this was their theory, was that segregation and having all of the things that were attendant to that caused the black children to feel inferior. This psychological study became a major piece of the case that went up to the Supreme Court on Brown versus Board of Education and is cited in the decision. Well, I had occasion, I have some projects in Africa that we're doing at the university, and part of it is recruiting students to Southern Utah University. We had no students from Africa when I started there, and we're now approaching 100 from a bunch of different countries, and I could go into more details about this, along with some projects that we're doing that are really, really exciting. But this is the part that I want to make a point of, and that is the last time I was in Kinshasa, Congo, driving through the market with my local guides, and they were showing us, just driving down the market, and as I was looking at the markets, it's kind of like a mall in the United States. There's, this is going to sound like a stereotype. It's not. Maybe it is. There is booth after booth after booth after booth selling dresses. And then there's one little cubbyhole selling men's clothes. It's kind of like a mall. But just like miles of mannequins with dresses on them. And every mannequin is white. This is not a country with white people. I mean, there's a city that I go to in Congo where there are 0 white people. I mean, I might see one, but I'm the only one there. And to see mannequin after mannequin after mannequin that's white is kind of a surprise to me. And so I tried asking questions of the people I was with, and the one that I asked the question said, "Oh, you Americans, you're oversensitive." And I thought, oh, maybe we are. The next one said, "Oh, we just kind of assume that white is better." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, isn't it? Another one said, I don't think that black mannequins are available to buy. And I said, we have a lot of black mannequins in the United States. So if you're buying your mannequins from China or anywhere, they're making black ones. They're not just white. Somebody's choosing to buy the white ones. And it's because, it might be because there may be some relation to the same thing that we saw in this study for Brown versus Board of Education and the implicit bias, where even the in-group group has a bias against themselves. So this issue of implicit bias is a serious issue. And it's something that is important for us to gain so that we can behave better. But it's also hugely important because people have an inclination to see themselves based on these biases in a negative way. And we have the ability to help fix this if we just will be focused and work on it. Okay, attitudes and stereotypes. They're all over the place. We've talked about this, I think, enough. They're based on facts. There's a basis in reality. Old people are forgetful. Some people are old. Some old people are forgetful. But not all old people are forgetful. Asians are good at math, but not all Asians are good at math. We draw these stereotypes and then they drive our decisions. I'm going to skip that one. What's in a name? Okay. Now, again, I'm going to run over to my laptop where I can get sound. So this is Kimberly Papillon. This is a TED Talk. The Neuroscience of Decision Making. And in your own time, you can go listen to the whole TED Talk. I would recommend it to you. Kimberly Papillon came, this is the person I told you about at the beginning of my presentation, who came to Southern Utah University, and we spent some time with her. Fascinating experience. She's going to tell the story, and I think it'll be more enjoyable for you to hear it in her voice to break up mine. She's going to tell you the story about a research project at Harvard.
So why don't we do an experiment? They took a group of Harvard undergrads and they put them in front of a computer one by one by one. And they told them, you are about to have an email conversation with the person in the room next door. Now, the person in the room next door is an underpaid graduate student. Well, they're a graduate student. We're going to assume they're underpaid. And they've been given a script. And the college student, the undergraduate student, has a script too. Let's say about 10 or so questions they're going to ask the person in the room next door, including what's your math and what's your verbal SAT scores. And the person in the room next door is going to give the same answers each and every time they get a certain question. So each and every one of the conversations with a different college student is exactly the same. We need a variable. How about the email addresses? Some of the undergraduate students, to reach the person in the room next door, are given the email address Amy, A-M-Y, at Harvard. Others are given Chen, C-H-E-N. To reach the person in the room next door, conversation ensues, math and verbal SAT scores are shared, conversation ends, the proctor walks back into the room and says to the undergraduate student, do you recall the math and verbal SAT scores that were shared with you? So, what happens? The people with the email address Chen for math remember the math score higher than what they were told. And for Amy, they remember it lower. What's going to happen for verbal? It switches. The people with the email address Amy remember it much higher than what they were told. And for verbal, those who use Chen remembered it lower. To be clear, the people with the email address Amy remember her scoring higher in verbal. Those are the same people who downgraded her in math. Oh, there's something I forgot to tell you about this particular study. When each and every one of the undergraduate students walked in the room, before they typed a single key on the computer, they were all told the exact same thing. They were all told, you are about to have an email conversation with an Asian American woman by the name of Amy Chen. That's how insidious implicit bias is.
Isn't that interesting? I hope that you could all hear that. The researchers brought in all these students and said, you're going to have an email conversation with an Asian female by the name of Amy Chen. And in this conversation, you're going to ask questions. And here's a script. And some of the questions are, what were your ACT scores for math and what were your ACT scores for language skills? Everyone had the same thing. Everyone was told up front that it was an Asian female by the name of Amy Chen. The only thing that changes is that half of the student participants in this study were given an email address of amy@harvard.edu. It probably was Amy 123 or something. But amy@harvard. And then the other half were given Chen at Harvard. And those that were emailing back and forth, typing Chen, remembered her math score higher than it was, and those that were typing Amy remembered her math score lower than it was. And those that were typing Amy remembered her language score higher than it was, and those that typed Chen lower than it was. They knew all the same facts, but just that little teeny change of communicating with an Amy and communicating with a Chen threw them off and brought out this implicit bias. Of course, all Chinese are better with math and they're worse with language. This is so incredible as to how much this can impact us. Now think about this. This is important. Think about this when you're screening cases. Think about this when you're looking at the addresses or the names or any of those other little details that might create these implicit little biases that come out. And I don't think that in this study, any of the people had a negative impression of Asians, or that negative impression isn't what came out. It was just simply this bias about the skills that they held. Well, we could go on, not just names. Those are names. Look at this quick example. Mock trial. This is a Duke law school study. Facts were given. the same exact police report. The only difference is in one of the police reports, the name of the suspect is William, and in the other one, the name of the suspect is Tyrone. Same everything else. And when they asked people to read through the report and then gave a little quiz on how well they recalled the facts relating to aggression, they remembered the aggression facts more for Tyrone than they did for William. Isn't that interesting? Think about the implications that that has for you in a trial, where a real jury is listening to the facts, or a bench trial where the judge is listening to the facts. If you're aware of that bias yourself, but for heaven's sakes, don't forget that the juries have these kind of biases, and you may need, as you present cases, to be careful to make sure that you're going overboard to help present the facts, because people remember them differently based on these implicit biases. It affects our ability to remember. Okay, how well can you read a face? I'm not going to give you this test, but this is online and you can go take this test, right? I think my PowerPoint remains here. Let me tell you what this test does. Alexander Todorov, sorry, got it right, Todorov, Princeton researcher, went back from 2004 to 2008 and polled all of the congressional races. And then took the faces of the candidates and asked people to rank the faces. So I'm taking this test and I don't know who these people are. These are congressional races all over the country. And maybe I know one of them for my own congressional seat, or maybe I know a couple. But what he found out is that people were able, just by looking at the face, to predict 70% accuracy for who would win. Just by looking at the face. There are features in a face that we associate with competence. And by looking at those features, it tends to influence how we vote. Someone looks more competent, and it affects the race. They can predict with 70% accuracy, based on this significant study of facial features, who's going to win the race. Here is kind of an image that helps illustrate this a little bit. But the features that come into play: how large is the forehead, how large are the cheekbones, the size and shape of the chin, and even as subtle as the indentation of the top of the nose. The more indentation you have, the less trustworthy. I don't know how this stuff works, but they've replicated this study all around the world, even for Swiss children. In looking at the French Parliament candidates, they were able to predict 70% accuracy of who was going to win just based on the faces. What's important about this? What's important is that if you look at a mugshot and you have an immediate impression, I'm really good at reading people, you probably aren't. Because you're judging based on facial features that most people think and associate with trustworthiness or kindness or any number of other traits. And that might not be true, because it's really not what the person is. It's just the way the face is shaped, the distance of the eyes, the eyebrow, the width of the face, all those kinds of things. There's a theory that the more baby-like a face looks, the bigger the eyes, the whiter the face, the more kind and loving and trustworthy the person is. I don't know if that's right, but that's one of the theories. They haven't really figured this out. Here's an interesting study about faces. So back in Florida in 1979, they found that there was a difference between white and black sentences. That African Americans received longer and more sentences than white defendants. So the Florida Department of Corrections tried to fix this, and they put into statute all of these protections to try to force judges into sentencing based on things other than race. And they found that it worked. That there was a similarity between the sentences of those who were of color and those that were white. Well, in 1997, some psychologists went back and tried to pore through all this data to analyze it fully. And this is what they found. They found that, yes, sentences for those who are white are similar to those who are black. But within those who are white, defendants who had more Afrocentric features had longer sentences than those who did not have Afrocentric features. And those who were black but had more pronounced Afrocentric features had longer sentences. So independent of race, those that looked more white got better sentences. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we can create these guardrails and we keep creating them, but there's something inside that just keeps coming out. And it makes it so that we've got to be super careful. And you're aware of the shoot, no shoot kind of tests that we have. That if you see somebody you've got African American and whites, and they're holding one of three objects, a cell phone, a wallet, or a gun, and they do these really quick tests, and your assignment is shoot or no shoot. You shoot if there's a gun, you don't shoot if it's a cell phone or a wallet. As it turns out, in some of these tests, if the person is black with a wallet, shoot is used more often than if the picture is of a white person with a gun. It's because our mind has built patterns, implicit biases, and we react. And then when you read in the news that some officer has done a fatal shooting, it may be explicit bias, which is what they're being accused of. It might be an implicit bias that they're unaware of. But in the heat of the moment, their unconscious brain takes over, and there's an unfortunate outcome. This is everywhere. So here's the police chief test. You take a group of people who are assigned to hire a new chief of police. A lot of tests here. So we get with the group. This is the search committee. And we say, we're going to hire a new chief of police. We want you to tell us what you think is most important for this department. And we've got two candidates that we're going to present to you. The one candidate is book smart. This is a person who's connected, well-connected with people that are of influence, very intelligent, has got great degrees, really understands the theory of police work and all those kinds of things. And we're going to present you with the second person who is street smart. Not as book smart, but street smart. Gets along great with the officers. It's been out on the streets, done the rough and tumble, knows how it works. What do you think we should hire? And the search committees debate it, and they'll say, we think that we need a street smart person. Or we think we need a book smart person. And then we present them resumes with the names flipped around. And as it turns out, they have a bias towards hiring male chiefs, and they will change their opinions about whether they need a book smart or a street smart person, depending on what the male is. Fascinating, all these biases. Well, in summary, so what? What can we do about implicit bias? I'd like to give you kind of the former prosecutor and college president view of this, because this is all about learning. And learning is largely all about emotion. Here are some quotes from Dr. Mary Helen Imardino Yang, and she came and spoke at SUU a little while ago. She's got a wonderful book. Had a chance to talk to her about her research. And she said that over the past 2 decades, science has upended our notions that emotion gets in the way of learning. That in fact, all learning is dependent on emotion. We can't learn anything. It is literally neurobiologically impossible to build memories, engage complex thoughts, or make meaningful decisions without emotion. And what do we mean by emotion? Emotion is these action programs that have evolved as extensions of survival mechanisms. They're basically things that matter to us. Emotions matter to us. We have basic emotions like fear and disgust. Fear keeps us from the edge of cliffs to keep us alive, and disgust keeps us from eating spoiled food to keep us alive. We have social emotions like love that make us affiliate, procreate, and care for children. If it wasn't for this emotion, humanity would have been gone a long time ago. Everyone with small children understands that. We have intellectual emotions. These emotions steer our curiosity to cause us to explore and discover. They form in us admiration of others, which causes us to emulate good virtues, compassion. They motivate us to punish someone, to change behavior and protect others. These emotions are even found in things that we don't normally associate as being emotional. You can hook up the brain of a mathematician and show them beautiful formulas, and the same parts of their brain will fire up that someone has when they look at a beautiful painting or hear beautiful music. These emotions are important. Our brains haven't evolved to waste energy on things that don't matter. They spend their time on things that matter. And that's where these emotions come from. So here's my challenge to you. We've talked about implicit biases, stereotypes, patterns, and all these kinds of things. The challenge is to go home and spend some time working on this. And I'm going to give you some suggestions from a university setting that hopefully will help. Learning communities. These are really successful methods employed in universities to help students learn. And I challenge you to create your own learning communities. Make it social. If you have a small office, your learning community might be the whole office. If you've got a large one, it might be a small subset of the office. If there is nobody in your office that's different from anybody else, then you might want to go out in the city or the county and bring a few people in to join you. And in these small learning communities full of diverse people, spend some time together. You might want to say, let's create reading groups. We're going to study evidence laws. We're going to study diversity. We're going to study implicit bias. We're going to take these tests. We're going to meet once a month for 30 minutes or an hour. We're going to read papers. But it's going to be part of our culture as little learning communities to study together. Very, very effective. Second, study abroad. Diversity training. Do your own. I was talking with one of our international students. Said, what would you have me tell this group of attorneys tomorrow? And he said, tell them to leave town once in a while. Tell them to get out and meet people. And don't do it on a tour bus, right? Don't go to Mexico and build a school for somebody as if you're the superior person coming down to save them. That doesn't help you. It does if you work shoulder to shoulder and you're being supportive, but it doesn't help if you're doing something that they may or may not need. So what you need to do is find ways to engage with them. Go to other countries. I spent time in Africa, and what was so fascinating to me was after the very first visit of meeting with people, engaging with them, when I came home, my entire emotional response was different to people from Africa, and in particular people from Congo, which is the country that I've come to learn to love. So do that. Third, wander. Wander around. Don't have lunch at the same cafeteria every time. Don't hang out with the same people all the time. Make new friends. Find people that aren't like you and make friends with them. Stop befriending people on Facebook if they have different opinions. In fact, you should seek out people that have different opinions. You can never get rid of implicit biases. You will never be able to expand your view of life if you shut down everybody that's different than you. Stop watching Fox News or MSNBC and start going to other news sources where you can get messages from people different than you, and try your hardest to learn from them. And then prove yourself wrong on something. Set a goal. Today I'm going to prove myself wrong, and go look for evidence to show that you're wrong. I had a friend call me up the other day, and he said, 7 or 8 years ago, you and I had an argument, and I just want to tell you that you were right. And I thought, holy cow. He said, I made a goal to find times when I was wrong and to reach out to the person and tell them I was wrong, because I wanted to change my character. And I thought, that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Evaluate your decision points. Use and rely on your System 2 brain. Slow down your thinking. Slow down your thinking. If you're doing an interview and you look at somebody and that person looks like they're perfect for the job, ask yourself, why does that person look perfect for the job? It might be their face is round. It might not, because the person's the most qualified. Find objective criteria. Set the criteria out before you start. If you establish the criteria after you start, you might fall into a very common bias of selecting criteria to match the outcome you want. So if you create the criteria before you start, it will help you avoid a bias later on. And then use frequent self-assessments. And make this social. Do this with somebody else. Frequent self-assessments. Testing short quizzes, we have found in a university setting, helps people learn. You learn more by short, quick quizzes, and you can give yourself quizzes. Just simply reading material over and over again doesn't embed it in your mind. You've got to do work. It takes work. If you go home from this conference after it's over, you will almost immediately forget 70% of everything you heard, and the other 30% will gradually go away. It takes effort to keep you from just simply forgetting everything. So take the challenge to make that effort. Here's and I've got 1 minute left, I think. Remember this: law is democracy's chosen profession. Prosecutors are society's first teachers. You are in a position to not only change the way you see the world and therefore become a better person, but you are in a position to shape the opinions of societies at large and to support our democracy and help it work. Take that challenge and help us become a better community, state, nation, and world. Nobody's in a better position than you. It's a great challenge. Be grateful that this is a challenge that you can take on. It is the values you hold. As a prosecutor, your job is to ensure the administration of justice reflects the highest ethical and professional standards. You have the responsibility of a minister of justice, not simply that of an advocate. You have taken an oath to discharge the duties of attorney and counselor at law with honesty, fidelity, professionalism, and civility. There is no one in our society in a better position to help heal our society and to keep people safe and help us move through these implicit biases than you do. You're the hub of the judicial system, which is the hub of the third branch of government. You can shape everybody. Go out and do it. Thank you so very much. Again, it's an honor to be here. Once a prosecutor, always a prosecutor. I hope I get a chance to see you all again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, President Wyatt. I think that really encapsulates what the training committee is trying to do, with its whole theme for this conference and this year. We'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and we will start up again at 10:30.